This is Jake. He's an interesting yet strange young man. He watches and sits alone. But what do we really see here? He has an interesting style, sure, uses a silver watch that doesn't tick, poser, and he always wears white shoes. For work, he's an architect by day. For fun, he drinks with his buddies at night. And sometimes, to take things up a notch, he'll go on a date once a week, or twice a week, or 3 times a week. One day, Jake was walking out of the local grocery store, which he tended to do every so often. Man's gotta eat. Only on this particular day, something stopped him in his tracks. It was an envelope of cash lying on the ground. Unsure of how to react, Jake looked around for a moment, then looked back. It was a fresh stack of bills. Now I'd love to tell you that Jake left the cash where it was, or even turned it into the police, but he didn't. He simply dropped his groceries, picked up the envelope, and walked away. In fact, he was so infatuated with his new discovery that he left his groceries behind, which unfortunately for him were stolen soon after. It didn't feel good about what he'd just done, but it didn't feel bad either. To Jake, fate had specifically placed the money there for a reason, so he continued his day. He went to work, looking over both of his shoulders as he did. So then, unapologetically spending his new cash on expensive bottles, expensive treatment, and expensive friends, he cheers everyone around him, taking one shot, then another shot, then another shot after that. Finally, he checked his phone and received an enticing invitation from a lady friend. He pounded one more shot, and he left. He drank more than he had in quite some time, and stupidly, Jake proceeded to get into his car. He looked for the right key, fumbled a bit, then, he got in. He figured out he could manage a quick drive. I mean, come on, he was Jake. This was his lucky day. Jake became easily distracted. He ended up losing complete control of the vehicle, and our boy Jake hit someone. Let's talk about Julia. She's young, peculiar, wears different clothing, and spends her time in obscure parts of town, like this cafe for instance. She's unpredictable and definitely lives by her own rules. She wears trainers without laces, has straight hair, and always wears leather coats. I mean, always. But most interestingly, she has eyes that sometimes change color. Julia doesn't have many friends, nor does she really want any. At least, that's what she tells herself. And although she has a kind face and a unique style, don't be fooled. Julia claims to suffer from kleptomania. For those who don't know, kleptomania is an impulse control disorder that results in an irresistible urge to steal. And that's exactly what Julia does. One day, Julia managed to steal a watch, a hairbrush, earrings, and a strawberry smoothie. That was just another regular day. That is, until she noticed something very odd. It was a man running with a bag of fresh cash, and no one was chasing him. The thievery had company after all. Impulsively, she called the police. That's right, a girl who had just broken various laws herself just called the cops on this man. Was she a changed person, or was she just protecting herself? Well, a few moments later, she came across 2 bags of groceries sitting on the ground. As it turns out, Julia hadn't changed at all. She completed her day by texting a fellow who she knew would respond right away. 2 words were capable of captivating the young man's attention completely. Come over. That was her message. This is it. This is our life. Let's talk about Paul. He is a criminal. Being a criminal is what he knows, it's what he thinks about, and it's what he does. Anytime he tries to live life according to law, he miserably fails. To Paul, there's only one thing you can do when something is wrong. He would get caught as often as he would commit crimes, and this time, this cost him a year in prison. After the long 12 months, he was finally released and returned home to his wife. Even though he was glad to be back in his element, the world that he knew had changed a bit. Particularly, his wife had changed, but he chose to ignore it. One day, as he was preparing himself a meal, Paul noticed something peeking out from under the microwave. It was a letter. He opened it only to find overdue balances his wife, who he loved, was in debt. He didn't want to commit another crime, but he needed to get his wife out of the hole, so Paul did what Paul knows how to do best. He robbed a bank. All seemed to be going well until suddenly an officer stopped him in his track, causing a stack of cash to drop on the ground. And that was it for Paul. What about Chloe? This young woman thrives on her independence, yet just sad eyes and an addictive personality. She feels trapped in a world that only she understands. She works on a laundry by day and spends the rest of her days watching time go by while her husband is in jail. One day, Chloe found a new distraction. Online casinos can be extremely addictive. Such made Chloe quickly become obsessed. One day, while she was washing a few dishes, the woman received the call that her husband had already left prison and was coming home. Initially, she was thrilled to see Paul again. Eventually, however, everything has changed. 5 days later, a large financial letter came in the mail. It was obvious that Chloe's savings were undoubtedly eaten by the addiction for online games. Chloe was in debt. She decided to hide the letter so Paul wouldn't see it, then grabbed her coat, her keys, and left. Along the day, she wandered around the streets with no motive or destination. Things were supposed to be perfect again, but instead, she was in debt. She didn't know what she was gonna do. Lost in her thoughts, Chloe got on her motorcycle. Unluckily, Chloe got hit. So what does all this mean? Let's recap. Had Chloe not been addicted to gambling, she wouldn't have been in debt. Had she not been in debt, Paul wouldn't have been motivated to rob a bank. Had Paul not robbed the bank, Julia wouldn't have called the police. Had Julia not called the police, Paul wouldn't have dropped the cash. Had Paul not dropped the cash, Jake would never have found it. Had Jake never found it, he would have never had a reason to celebrate and get drunk. Had he never driven drunk, the accident would have never happened. I believe what I'm trying to say is, we are all inevitably connected in some way. Every single one of us, all over the world. What one person does affects another. If one of us falls, another one will fall, and another one, until all of us have fallen. Like a domino.